So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the third edition of the Scale Up Marketing Roundtables. This session is focused very much on how to calculate a budget and how to measure whether your budget, your marketing is actually working or not. So what we're going to kick off with is just a bit of housekeeping. So just a few notes in the housekeeping. We're looking to run the session for about 30 to 45 minutes. So the first 15 minutes are going to be a presentation from Tristan from Growth Division, who's going to take us through, share some of his expertise and his knowledge, and then we'll go into 15 to 30 minutes of discussion. So if you've got any questions for Tristan or any members of the team who have brought these roundtables together, please feel free to share them out, or if you're faced with a particular challenge right now you'd like an answer to, that's the time to pose those questions to our experts. You'll all have heard that I have started to record the sessions, so if you're uncomfortable with being recorded, I suggest just pop your camera off, but do please stay around for the session because you'll notice that we record them and put them out on YouTube. So the previous sessions are available if you want to watch the first two sessions of the series. Of course, we'd love you to turn your cameras on. It does make it really good for us if there are cameras on, so do please go ahead and do that. If you're comfortable doing so, and then when you're not asking questions, it would be great if you would put your mic on mute so I don't have too much background noise. Last but not least, the roundtables are brought to you by Agency Squared, Ed Davidson Marketing, Growth Division, and ISL Talent. So we have a series of 5 workshops. We've had the first 2, what is marketing for scale-ups, and what type of scale-up marketing do you need? And those 2 videos are both available on YouTube. And you'll have seen the links to those in the emails you got confirming how to join the session today. I've just introduced what today's session is all about. So it's budgeting and return on investment. And then the last 2 sessions are coming up on the 18th of May, which is about hiring and building your marketing team. And then lastly, finding and hiring agencies, so getting those external partners to help you as you roll out your marketing. So on that note, with the housekeeping done, I'll hand you over to Tristan, who can take you through his part of today's presentation.
Yeah, cheers, Andy. So yeah, just as a quick kind of agenda, I'm going to do a bit of an intro to myself, so you know who's talking to you. And then the first part, we're going to go into how to build a growth and marketing budget. And I also go into a little bit on how to kind of actually start to build out your strategy off the back of that initial budget that you put forwards. And then there is the kind of big question about how to actually measure the success of your budgets and how to measure the success of your growth marketing in general, which is a very difficult and tricky thing to actually do. So hopefully I'll be able to give you some insights into that. And then, as Andy's already mentioned, we're going to dive into the roundtable discussions. So I suppose then, just as by way of introduction, who am I? I am originally a kind of CRM consultant and growth marketer, and I still do a bit of this, and also help advise startups on kind of growth marketing and implementing new kind of growth strategies. And also alongside Tom, I'm one of the founding partners of Growth Division, which is a growth marketing agency working with startups to help them find and validate scalable channels to market through our community of growth experts. Over the last few years, we've been lucky enough to work with some super exciting names, and we've been responsible for the growth of some of the UK and Europe's fastest growing and most exciting startups. Notably, we've been working with the likes of Weaver, which is a B2B fintech startup for the last couple of years, as well as like startups.com for over a year over in the US. And you might recognize a few of the other brands as well on the screen here. And effectively, my role at Growth Division is to help build out the channel marketing strategies for these businesses. And a core part of that is how to resource that strategy and actually how to build out your marketing budgets more generally. So that's kind of what we're going to be diving into today. Just flipping to the next slide, something weird's happened. So I suppose just starting at the top, I just wanted to kind of define actually what is a startup marketing budget, and it's pretty obvious, but I just kind of took this definition from HubSpot so we're all on the same page. So a startup marketing budget is basically the total spend that you're planning for your marketing and sales and growth function. So this can actually factor in all sorts of key expenses. It includes advertising costs, it includes costs to build content marketing, it includes all of your marketing technology as well, your MarTech stack, and also it includes resourcing your kind of cost of actually bringing in people as well into your marketing budget. So who's actually doing the implementation? So it's basically everything associated with the growth of your startup within sales and marketing. So that's kind of a broad definition, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Now, the first question is then, how do you calculate your marketing budget? And I see this being done quite poorly with a lot of startups. And a lot of the time people kind of go out, and especially startups that are going out and raising money, they basically say, okay, you know, we're going to raise 500K in our next investment round. And we'll just put a portion of that, you know, kind of put a finger in the air and say, okay, I'm just going to portion out a percentage of that raise towards our growth budgets. And that's kind of like a justified kind of, you know, way of building the marketing budget. But actually, there's not that much thought that's gone into it. And there's a much better way and a much more kind of logical way of actually building out your marketing budget. So, and what I've kind of built out here is kind of a top-down approach to actually building out your approach to building your marketing budget based on specific inputs in terms of what your business is going to try and achieve over the course of the next 12 months. I put in this kind of calculator in terms of your revenue. So what you're trying to achieve in terms of number of revenue and number of customers. So the thing is, you're always going to have to, excuse me, make some sort of assumptions in terms of building out your growth marketing budget. And I actually just want to quickly dive into this calculator here, because I think it's going to be a useful task to just kind of talk through the logic of actually, you know, what I've built out here. So the way that I've thought about this is like, okay, so where are you at now in terms of your growth, your monthly revenue? Where do you want to get to? So let's say you want to be at 150K in the next 12 months. And how many customers is that going to take to get you there? So let's say it's 100. And then what I'm doing here is basically calculating what my gross margin is. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I'm using a lifetime value and cost of acquisition ratio to basically calculate our eventual cost of acquisition budget that we're going to need in order to get the number of customers we're trying to achieve. So lifetime value is basically the amount of profits you're going to be generating from a customer across the course of their lifetime. So that's why we're kind of bringing into this gross margin here to try and calculate our kind of end goal based. So basically what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, we want to get 100 customers, and based on that, we're going to have this kind of cost of customer revenue target per customer of 1,500. And that means our kind of monthly customer profit is 300. And we assume that they're going to stay around for 12 months, which means our total customer lifetime value is 3.6K. So this is kind of our assumed total kind of lifetime value of a customer. And then we can basically from there say, okay, what do we want that cost of acquisition to lifetime value ratio to be? And here I put 2, but you know, you might be targeting something like 3 or even 1. So that means you're willing to pay the same amount that customer is going to bring you in the lifetime of their business in a cost of acquisition. And often in an early stage startup, you might be looking at a cost of acquisition lifetime value ratio of 1, because you're willing to actually pay that same amount that customer is eventually going to bring you. But when you actually start to grow as a business, obviously you want to drive more profitability. So you might be looking at a ratio of 3, 4, or even 5. And at that point, then you're kind of becoming more and more profitable with your customers. But in the early stages, I say you might be targeting something like 1. So the customer is going to bring you 3,600. You're willing to pay for that customer 3,600. That means over the course of 12 months, your customer acquisition budget is £360,000. And therefore, per month, your budget is going to be £30,000. So I realized I've kind of gone into a lot of different concepts there and quite a lot of different numbers. But if anyone has any questions, do just let me know, or any clarification on any of these numbers as well, just let me know. But effectively, this is kind of a more logic-based way of actually justifying your marketing budgets. And so once you've calculated your marketing budget, that's great. So now you're saying, okay, across the next 12 months, we need to have £360,000 in order to hit our targets. Then the second point is, how do we actually build out our growth targets across the next 12 months? And again, using this model, I basically kind of modeled out a 12-month marketing budget here. So again, so we've got our 360,000, which actually you can see here, we've equally spread across the 12 months. So the reason why we do that as an equal spread across the 12 months without kind of having increases is because actually marketing takes a bit of time to actually learn what works and what doesn't work. So you still need to have a pretty decent budget at the beginning, and then over time your kind of average cost of acquisition is going to go down as you learn what works and you optimize your marketing spend towards activities that are actually paying off and doing a really good job for you. So over time, you're going to be getting more and more customers over time, but actually your marketing budget's generally going to stay relatively consistent across the 12-month period. So it's just worth noting that. And then based on the kind of revenue target that we've set in 12 months, I basically put across kind of a growth rate. And up here, there's basically an input for your growth rate. So the smaller your growth rate, the assumption is you're going to kind of hit the ground running. You're going to be growing quite quickly from month one. The bigger your growth rate, it means that you're probably not going to, and this is MRR here, you're probably not going to really grow very quickly in the first few months. A good growth rate to work towards is about 40%. So this is kind of where you're starting to see this kind of exponential type of growth. A lot of startups make an error of kind of assuming they're gonna really grow very, very quickly and have a really hockey stick growth. And that's always great to kind of sell to investors that, okay, we're not going to grow very fast initially, but actually over time, we're going to grow very, very quickly. That's great to sell to investors, but you need to make sure you deliver on that. And that's kind of the difficulty of kind of promising investors hockey stick level growth. So the 40% growth assumption is a sensible one that's definitely achievable. So based on that 40%, we're basically, this model basically extrapolates this revenue target that we've got across 12 months and basically sets out your kind of revenue targets and also your number of customer targets. So you can see the first 3 months, we're only trying to get one customer. Then over time, we're kind of trying to get more and more and more. And there's some other useful things in here that I've kind of built out to actually help you achieve your kind of, actually build out your marketing targets. So I put two concepts in here: sales qualified leads and marketing qualified leads. And again, I've just made a couple of assumptions in terms of what your conversion rate is from sales qualified leads to customer rate, and then your marketing qualified lead to sales qualified lead rate is. So you can, again, start to target out based on your customer targets and your growth rate. You now have a certain number of leads that you're going to be driving for your business. And at the bottom here, we can also see the cost per lead and the cost of acquisition. And again, you can see here a very high cost of acquisition, 41,000 in month one. But actually, as we start to learn what works and what doesn't work, we get to just up to 1,000 cost of acquisition in month 12. So hopefully this model is something that can be a useful one. And again, I'm going to basically share this model at the end of this call, so you guys can basically implement and use this yourselves. So now we've kind of built our marketing budget. We know how much we need to spend to achieve our targets, and we've built out our targets across the next 12 months. That puts us in a really good position. But then it's like, okay, what are we actually going to do now? What are we actually going to spend this money on? And the next step in the process is basically how you actually build out your channel marketing strategy. And we use the Bullseye framework, which some of you might be familiar with, as a way to kind of build out what channels we think are going to work. And the idea of this is that there's kind of 20 channels in the outside ring. We'll choose a kind of the high impact channels that we think are going to help us achieve these targets. And we generally pick between 4 and 6 channels. So based on the budgets, we can start to actually build out what channels we can actually afford to use and what channels we think are going to be the high impact ones. And I'll come into now how to actually measure the success of this budget. So you built the budget, you built your targets, and you built your channel strategy. Now, how do you actually measure the effectiveness of this strategy over the course of time? And this is a really difficult thing to do. So, and actually, I spoke to a really great marketer, Oren Greenberg. Some of you may know him. He's a relatively well-known CMO in the startup space. And I asked him, what's the biggest problem when measuring performance of your growth budgets? And he basically identified that there's measuring irrelevant metrics, there's measuring vanity metrics, and then also people often try and measure everything. They're trying to measure all metrics. And he basically said you really need to hone down it and really focus on measuring what matters. And I think that's a great point. And so you need to basically define your targets in terms of what you want success, what you think success looks like in terms of your strategy. So again, I'm just going to jump back to this model quickly, because as part of this, we've basically built out our channel strategy here. So we think search engine marketing, paid social, email marketing, PR, organic social, direct outreach are going to be the channels that we're going to start to test. We can basically outline that we've kind of got our costs associated with the person, with the people, and we've got our costs other costs associated with the channel. So these might be channel ad spend costs, for instance. And then you've got your loaded spend per channel. So your total cost of running that channel on a monthly basis. And then what I've done here is basically made an assumption in terms of how many leads or how many customers we're going to be getting per channel. And then off the back of that, we can say these are the number of marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, and then obviously ultimately you do customers per channel as well on a monthly basis. So now we can set targets and we can track success per channel based on, end leads that we're getting from each channel. Now, I do want to caveat that approach is very kind of channel specific, and it's very much about driving results per channel. And some channels might not necessarily be focused on driving leads. They might be focused on brand awareness or just driving traffic to the website more generally. So there are other ways of actually tracking success. And what I'd encourage you to do in your channel strategies is basically think about what your channel is doing in the stage of the funnel. So for search engine marketing, it might be top of funnel and middle of funnel. What's the one metric that allows you to measure the success of how effective that channel is doing at being, a good driver of that specific part of the funnel? And then you basically associate that with a specific target that you want each of these metrics to be working towards, again, on a monthly basis. And it's basically a case of what I would encourage you to do is basically be really focused around what does success look like within that channel, and what one or two metrics allow you to really track the success of that over the course of time. It's a very difficult thing to do to track the success of a channel and of an entire strategy. So I really encourage you to try and boil it down to a few key metrics of what you think that channel is going to be doing for you. It can be very simple, like the leads-based one that I just showed you, or you can get into a bit more complexity around actually what is that channel doing in terms of what you want it to be doing in the strategy. So yeah, that's kind of a bit of a whirlwind, and I appreciate that I've gone into like some depth around some relatively startup terminology around cost of acquisition, lifetime value ratios, and things like this. If you did have any further questions and you wanted me to like specifically look at the models that you guys have built for your businesses, I'm happy to dive into that personally. We do actually also have a newsletter at Growth Division, which I'd encourage you to sign up to, which we're kind of sharing insights on there, and also you can follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter. But I suppose now we're kind of going to dive into the kind of roundtable discussions, and I'm happy to kind of go back over any of the things that I've just talked over and dive into more details if anyone has any specific questions. But also it'd be good to kind of speak around like anyone here who's running a business who has some specific challenges around building their budgets. And are people actually tracking their performance in terms of their growth and their strategy and the budget that they've allocated in an effective way? It'd be interesting to hear if some people are doing that well, or again, some of the challenges that some people may face. So there's a couple of points of discussion, but yeah, hopefully that was a useful session, useful kind of whirlwind, as I say.
Yeah, Tristan, thanks. I think that was a whirlwind of high quality, lots of real value in there. So thank you for that. Has anybody got any questions they'd like to pose to Tristan based on either the presentation or anything you're working on right now you want some assistance with? Okay, if not, I've got a, oh, go ahead.
I do have a question, and thank you. That was really useful, and I'd love to get my hands on the formulas. That would be super. But I guess my main question would be, in terms of where I am at with the business right now, we're very much in that testing and learning phase, and we, rather than being able to say, okay, we've raised X amount of investment, we can allocate X amount of marketing budget to that, we're rather going more on the bootstrapped route, where we're doing kind of small tests and seeing what works, and then it's really kind of how do we finance that via our own revenue and grow from there. And so it's, yeah, what would your kind of thoughts be on applying those kind of logics to a more kind of bootstrapped approach to marketing?
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good question, Victoria. I think, yeah, the same kind of logic applies, I suppose, even when you've got much smaller budgets, or even if you're actually implementing a lot of the strategies yourselves. There's still a cost associated in terms of your own time. So I would still kind of take time to sit down and really think about kind of where you're allocating your time in terms of like the channels, and then again going through that kind of what does success look like per channel, and making sure you're tracking the metrics associated with those channels, and just making sure that you're kind of tracking, what you're actually achieving with those channels versus what the cost associated with each of those channels looks like. So, I think even on whether you're, operating with, tens or hundreds of thousands in marketing budget, or whether you're operating with hundreds to low thousands in marketing budget, I think it's still important to really be strategic around like where you're spending your time, and where you're allocating even the smaller budgets that you've got, and what you're trying to achieve with those budgets, and really setting that line in the sand in terms of what success looks like, and being quite strict around, like, if after 3 months you're still not seeing the results in terms of success per channel and per activity you're doing, then that's the point where you need to review it and be like, okay, let's cut this channel or cut this activity, because it's not proving to give me a return on my time or in my resource.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Just to add to that, I suppose that when you're bootstrapped, lifetime value becomes really more important, because in terms of expectations of when you get those returns, if you are scaling really quickly and you can get a higher burn rate, and there's a level of knowledge about lifetime value, but it's not so much impetus, then that's fine. But if you are bootstrapped, you need the money returned from the customer, you have to know what your CAC is. I suppose that's a consideration that is more important when you're bootstrapped, if that makes sense, Victoria.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the approach that I'm kind of taking right now, we look at, okay, how much does this unit cost for the customer, and then that revenue, what percentage of that revenue do we want to put into acquiring customers? And so taking that approach, and there's a lot of kind of tricks that you could do with e-commerce in terms of like bundling, and just making sure that you're kind of creating more room for investing into marketing. Yeah.
I would have
looks like you have a question, so go ahead.
Yeah, I do have a question with regards to how to track growth performance. If I recall correctly, one of the channels of what was the
Bullseye.
The Bullseye, exactly. Thank you. One of them is PR, right? And so, how do you measure success with PR as a channel? Because traditionally PR isn't even a customer acquisition channel, right? It's public relations, it's shaping the image of the company in the public. So how do you assess its role in growth?
So I think that we've run 3 of these sessions, and I think in every session so far it's come back to like, how do you track brand related activities and like top of the funnel activities? because it is notoriously hard to do. I think, again, it goes back to kind of the like, what do you want out of that activity? What do you want out of that channel? Because, you know, for PR, there's like the intangible kind of, you know, brand awareness stuff, which is great, but you can start to measure some metrics off the back of this. So you can track, you know, number of website sessions generated off the back of a referring source from your Guardian article, for instance. So you can actually start to track some form of tangible return on investment from PR. So it might be like number of website sessions in the first, you know, X number of days after the article's been published. And, you know, you set a success metric against that, or even on a monthly basis, it's like how many web sessions is PR generating for me? So there are kind of like tangible things that you can start to track with PR, but then there's the intangible brand related stuff that is very difficult to track. And I think that's where you need to have your kind of overarching kind of metrics that you're tracking that's across all channels in terms of just, you know, what are we trying to achieve? And PR is just kind of one of the part of the mix of that. And again, you can do stuff like tracking, like without PR, what we're achieving, and then adding PR into the mix, what can we be achieving as well? So that there's some kind of proxies that you can take to tracking success, but it is quite a difficult challenge. And actually, Tobias, I read a good article recently around like tracking back brand related performance that I can send to you off the back of this call, which, yeah, has some interesting insights into that.
I think PR measurement is always one of those difficult subjects for getting a real concrete idea as to how you're going to measure it. And in fact, it's a challenge for the PR industry as a whole as to how do you measure impact. But Tristan's had some really good ideas there. So, you know, growth in traffic from referrals, or growth in number of referrals, or some of the SEO metrics you might use, improvements in domain authority, that kind of stuff is a useful indicator. And then, as you went on to say there, the brand-based stuff, number of brand name searches versus product or issues related searches, is also a useful indicator as to whether PR is working or not. So yeah, some really good ideas, Tristan.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions?
I'll throw a question at you, Tristan. You mentioned, I suppose, it's like a flat view of spend over the course of the year. I'm wondering if you've seen in the growth division clients around levels of seasonality that you might want to kind of factor in. So if there's particular times at, say, Christmas time in terms of e-commerce, or new business, start of financial years and things from a B2B perspective, we'd front weight or back weight levels of spend to take the most amount of increases in conversion based on levels of spend in that way.
I think if I can just add to that question, because I had a very similar one as well, is evening it out across the year, I suppose, is good from a planning perspective, but doesn't necessarily allow you for planning in for major activities. So let's say there's a big exhibition in August that, you know, you have to be at for your sector. And the other thing is, as well, from a contingency point of view, is it worthwhile holding some back so that if you test to see what's not working, you can play around with it? So sorry to confuse Ed's question, but it's such an interesting one. Yeah.
It's not, it's a really good one. So actually, so Ed, for sure, like, I think if you're running, you know, specific events, or if your business, you know, relies on, you know, seasonal demand, I think definitely you need to be considering these things when planning out your budgets. And in that case, I would say it shouldn't really be flat as I've laid out in this model. However, like, generally, the point I wanted to really make was, like, you know, don't kind of like have a scaling spend, like try and keep it as flat as possible, because that's what you have to be spending to learn in marketing. So in the first few months, when you're just starting out, you still need to be spending a decent amount to really be understanding what's working and what's not working. And you can see here, actually, like at the beginning, I've got these costs associated with management and these costs associated with ad spend. And the total of this is 14K, but I've actually budgeted 30K here. And like, we can always push budgets around a little bit, but generally keeping a budget set at the same level is great. And, you know, you can always kind of push budgets back. But then, you know, as you start to see really excellent results in some of these channels, that's where we can actually start to increase this budget to, you know, 15K and increase this budget to 10K, because we're seeing some good, you know, amazing stuff being done. And maybe actually you know, PR's done a rubbish job for us, so we're gonna actually take that channel out after a couple of months. And, you know, organic search is not doing very well, direct outreach. So it is about kind of moving budgets around over the course of the year. But yeah, the point I wanted to make is that, you know, you should still have decent budgets in the first few months, even if your targets are relatively small. You're going to get those increases in efficiency over the course of time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's a good shout in terms of, you know, making sure you've got a good level of spend at the beginning of the when you're kicking things off, in order to be able to learn quickly, because then once you've learned, then you can then double down, and then you can apply the levels of budget on the channels that are working best for you, and then you're going to scale up a lot quicker. So yeah, that makes sense. I suppose a follow-up question is, in terms of like your CAC, what do you include within that in terms of a view of, you know, fully loaded or non-fully loaded? So, for example, you've got, say, levels of people included here in terms of management through an agency. Then you've also got internally, if it's an internal view, that would be in terms of a different like CapEx spend, not OpEx spend. So you get to kind of understand where you see like that fully loaded cost per acquisition and where you think it should stand from a startup and then kind of scale up. So
yeah, I would say that you should really try and include loaded CAC wherever possible, because that's the true cost of acquisition of like all activities associated with growth. So, you know, if you've got someone internally and half of their time's spent on like marketing, you know, associate half of their salary to the loaded CAC, as well as like agency spend plus advertising spend. It's just best practice to really understand that, you know, total cost of both in terms of time, resource, you know, and advertising spend. If you're just going down the kind of like, you know, not taking people into consideration, I think that's where, you know, you're not really getting a kind of true indicator of like what your total cost of acquisition is as a business. So I would generally tend towards having a loaded CAC wherever possible, I would say. Is that what you tended to do, Ed?
Yeah, I think that's fair, because I think sometimes mistakes are made where you look at kind of SEO or organic traffic and you think it's free, and then there's
exactly
the cost of then writing the articles or maintaining the website or the link building, and that kind of tends to be ignored, and then it's just looked at purely based on the media spend in terms of performance activity. So yeah, making sure, I suppose it's just making sure you're comparing apples with apples so you can get the blended mix right.
Yeah, great point. It's actually a good example, the SEO one. Yeah.
I had a question for you as well, Tristan. You use a couple of terms there that are very kind of marketing terminologies, SQL and MQL, the sales qualified leads and marketing qualified leads. Typically, I've seen those applied in a B2B context, not so much in a consumer oriented context. So have you applied that model for consumer, say e-commerce, for example, or do you rather measure revenue rather than that conversion from SQL to MQL to SQL?
Yeah, so this is like the terminology here. You're right, Andy, is like B2B focused, but actually you could do something like, I mean, if it's like, let's say a product, I mean, e-commerce is slightly different, but if it's a product, you might be looking at like free trials, and then there's like paying customers, and then before free trial, you might have like newsletter signups. So, you know, it's just like changing the terminology, but it's thinking still around like what that funnel looks like, because there's still a funnel for B2B and there's still a funnel for B2C. And it's just like, you know, just understanding, you know, what those kind of gate posts are in terms of, you know, categorizing and segmenting your customer base and thinking about what the conversion points are along that. So it's yeah, the point is really is to take into consideration that funnel throughout. Yeah. Got
it. So aligning it to the buying journey gives you a good sense to say, how do I convert from free trial, obviously you can sign up, to then actually being a paying customer? That's good. Thanks, Tristan. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, any further questions? I feel like we could quiz Tristan for hours and still keep getting information from him, because there's so much in this really important subject area, isn't there? And an area that I think a lot of us are challenged with. How do we work out what the right budget is? How do we really measure to see whether what we're spending on marketing is adding the value, getting us the return we're looking for? So any further questions from around the table?
I've got a question, if that's okay.
Go for it, Charlie.
What's the best software to use in order to scale up the marketing? Like, would you recommend like HubSpot Premium or MailChimp Premium? What's the best tool? I mean, obviously we've spoken a lot about hiring people, and you know, hopefully I'm a worthwhile hire as well as my line manager. But I want to know about the software, the paid software that people use, if that's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different like MarTech tools. Like the kind of landscape is ever growing, and there's thousands, if not tens of thousands, of these tools out there. So it is difficult to find the right ones. There are the well-known ones that you just mentioned here, like HubSpot. I mean, it really depends on what you need, and I would say there's kind of like two ways of building your tooling. It's like the first is to use like more all-in-one, all-encompassing software such as HubSpot, which have like an email marketing tool within, and they've got a CRM system. They allow you to do sequences and workflows and website analytics, and you know, you can even integrate your Google ads into it. So you can do a lot of the kind of your marketing activities and track a lot of your marketing activities within something like HubSpot. But then there's the more fragmented approach where you're actually building and integrating your own marketing setup and tools, where you're using kind of specific tools to do specific jobs. And you know, that's an equally valid way of doing things, because then you get kind of best in class tools. But the problem is that then you have to use integration tools such as Zapier to make sure you're passing data across the different tools and you're keeping your customer data very clean across all the different tools. So it really depends on what you're looking for. But you know, for ease, and especially when you're a startup, I would probably be recommending more of the kind of all-in-one CRM tools such as HubSpot that allow you to do lots of things within the same tool and keeps all of your customer data in one place as well.
Okay, thank you.
I think a lot of that choice of tech comes down to what skills do you have in the team as well? How comfortable are you plugging together and getting different systems to work together? But also, what's the customer challenge you're trying to solve here as well? You know, starting with an ability to have an accurate picture as to who your customer is and how they're engaging with your organization, your startup, is a really good place to be, because then you can start collecting data and then sending behavioral targeted communications. HubSpot's great for that, as are other marketing automation platforms. As Tristan said, there's so much MarTech available. You could spend a lifetime just trying to find the right solution. So if you're a small team and you haven't got a lot of time or a lot of tech expertise, then choose something that's a bit all-encompassing and easy to administer. And a HubSpot or an ActiveCampaign or a MailChimp, they're all going to give you much of that functionality that you need to get going with. Okay, any further questions, or are we ready to wrap it up for today's roundtable? One last look around. Is everybody happy? Everyone got what they needed from today's session?
Just a quick question. You said you're going to share the Excel or Google Sheets table. It's actually super timely for me because I need to build something by Friday. So, are you sending that out today?
What I can do is I'll just share it in the Zoom link actually, and then what you can do is just basically you can make a copy of it. So it is a template, but if you just like go into File and then you can make a copy of it, and then you can like edit that to your heart's content.
It's in the chat window there for those that are looking for it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Everyone who needs it got the link. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, good. All right. So that brings us to the end of today's roundtable. The next two sessions, and so you've got a marketing problem. Should you hire? Is on the 18th of May. That's a Wednesday. So just note, slight change. It's a Wednesday, but also at midday. And then the last session, finding and hiring the best fit agency, is on Friday, 27th of May. So Wednesday and Friday, but again at 12 midday. Because you've registered, you'll all get the instructions for how to join us for those sessions. I hope that you will join us. And that you have enjoyed today's session. Do let us know, give us some feedback if it's been useful, and if there are other things you'd like to see us covering in future. But apart from that, thank you very much everybody for attending, and we'll see you again at a future roundtable.
Thank you.
Guys.
Thanks everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you.